Hey everybody, it's Max, and this is a review of Robotron 64 for the Nintendo 64. Now, this game is a port of a game called Robotron X, which came out for the PlayStation 1 and PC in 1996. Robotron X is a sequel to Robotron 2084, which came out in arcades in 1982. Robotron 64 is a twin-stick shooter, meaning it's a shoot-'em-up style game where you use one analog stick to move your character and another to control the direction that you shoot in. The Nintendo 64 didn't actually have two analog sticks, so you use the C buttons to control the direction that you shoot in instead of an analog stick. This is actually, though, more accurate to the original Robotron 2084 because you could not shoot in all directions in that game. I believe you can only shoot in 8. Now, the story in this game is really simple. Robots have taken over the world, and you have to kill as many of them as you can and save the last remaining survivors. And that's also pretty much what you do in the gameplay as well. You kill robots by shooting them, and you save the survivors to earn extra points. The levels are pretty much all exactly the same in terms of their layout, just a square. However, the game is constantly introducing new enemies, which keeps it interesting, and the enemies actually have a lot of variety, which is good because the enemies are the most important part of a game like this. There are some enemies that can shoot projectiles, some that move very fast, some that will spawn other enemies, and some that can't even be killed. And luckily, you don't have to destroy them to complete the level, but the variety in enemies really helps the game stay interesting, even after you've been playing it for a long period of time. The game also has power-ups, which can be very helpful when there are lots of enemies on the screen, all shooting projectiles at you at once. Now, this type of game can be very, very fun if the controls and the gameplay are good, and can be very, very bad if they're not. But luckily, in Robotron 64, the controls are very, very good and very, very smooth. You always can control your character really well, and you feel like if you made a mistake, it's your fault, not the game's. The game also includes a multiplayer mode, which unfortunately isn't that interesting. It's not co-op, just a competition to see who can get the highest score. It also seems like one person controls the movement of the character and the other controls where they shoot. This might just be a strange glitch on my copy of the game, though, because I searched all over the internet and couldn't find anything about the multiplayer, so I really don't know. The real fun of the game is in the single player, which actually has over 200 levels. Luckily, you have the ability to save using the N64 controller pack. And bonus stages are interspersed throughout the game that keep it interesting and usually just involve shooting a bunch of enemies that fly onto the screen, but are still fun. You get points for killing enemies and bonus points if you kill all the enemies in a single formation. This really reminds me of the bonus stages from Galaga, or Galaga, or however you say it. The graphics of this game are pretty good for an N64 game, but they're a bit pixely, which is pretty common for the era, especially when you're zoomed out. You can actually zoom in this game. If you press the L or R buttons, you can change the camera angle. There's a top-down view, a zoomed-in view, and a really zoomed-in view. The game does occasionally have issues with slowdown when there are a lot of enemies on the screen at once. However, it never really makes it hard to play, and is usually pretty unnoticeable. The music in this game is also pretty good, and fits the style of the game well. It's fast-paced techno that really makes the game exciting, especially when you're fighting lots and lots of enemies. It's not nearly as good as, say, the Super Mario Galaxy soundtrack, but nonetheless, it works well. The replay value of this game can be pretty high if you like trying to get the high score, but it can get boring after a while because there are so many levels and they're not all that different other than the enemies. Overall, if you like arcade-style gameplay where you're constantly trying to beat the high score, or just want a good twin-stick shooter for the Nintendo 64, this is definitely a game you should try out.